Hi, my name is Andy, and I want to talk about conversations. What's wrong with the world? I mean, there are many possible answers to that question. As Barack Obama liked to say, the world as it is not the same as the world as it should be. And it is in that gap that we stand. So I could give lots of answers to the question, what's wrong with the world? But I think part of the gap, part of the problem, is about a lack of good conversations, and hence a lack of strong relationships. We build some bonding relationships, that is, relationships with people who are like us in views and age and role in society. But we have far too few bridging relationships, relationships with people who think differently and vote differently and love differently and shop differently and live differently from us. And I wish I could say, at least the church isn't like that. The church is supposed to be full of bridging relationships and good conversations. Church is meant to be a community where we love each other so much that the love overflows like a reservoir and gives life to witness and mercy and justice. But you and I both know that the gap between the world as it is and the world as it should be is mirrored by a gap between the church as it is and the church as it should be. Businesses, they have a market culture. They can't help it. It's just the way they are. The state, it has a bureaucratic culture. But churches are supposed to have a relational culture. All too often, they end up not feeling relational at all, but like a business or like a bureaucracy. Or they just feel like a group of people who happen to be at the same place at the same time. And of course, if you don't have relationships, you don't have love, and you don't have listening, and you don't have evangelism, and you don't have warmth, and you don't have all the things that make life worth living. If a church doesn't have relationships with its community, well, at the very best, it will just do things to the people who live there with top-down planning that's bureaucratic or market-oriented or both. The only thing that can successfully be built top-down is a whole. So we need to learn how to have good conversations for the sake of the world. And we need to learn how to have good conversations for the sake of the church. Sometimes these conversations will be fairly leisurely. I call this kind of conversation a one-to-one. When someone becomes a curate, that's a kind of apprentice vicar, this is the first thing that we teach them to do. I say to them, if you have a 40-minute one-to-one with a different person every week for 3 years, at the end of the time, you will be the best connected person in your community, including the vicar, the GP, and the local councillors. And the model one-to-one, the mother of all one-to-ones, if you like, is the meeting we heard about earlier between Mary and Elizabeth. It's a meeting between equals. Elizabeth is the older, more senior cousin, so she deserves respect. And yet Mary is in such a unique position that Elizabeth spontaneously speaks a blessing over. Like all good one-to-ones, this isn't a sermon where one person speaks and the other person listens. Both genuinely disclose something about themselves, and this brings great joy. Even the unborn John the Baptist jumps for joy. I mean, who but somebody miraculously pregnant can truly understand another miraculously pregnant person? Out of this encounter come one of the best known prayers in the Christian world, the Hail Mary, And one of the favorite poems of the Christian world, the Magnificat. Out of it come courage, the courage to speak for Elizabeth, whose husband is unable to speak, and the courage to treasure in her heart for Mary. So, if you're the sort of person that likes acronyms, here's one about one-to-ones. SPOG, S-P-O-G. S is for stories. Whatever else we are stories. And a good conversation is one where you've heard a good story from someone else's life and told a good story from your own. You don't have to disclose things that are private, but you do need to be personal, you being yourself with somebody else being themselves. Just imagine the stories that Mary and Elizabeth had to tell of angels and wonder and unbelieving partners and the redemption of Israel. P stands for passion. In a one-to-one, we're revealing our deepest interests, the things that motivate us to act. And as we eavesdrop, we hear Mary speak of a God who pulls the mighty from their thrones and exalts the humble and meek. They told each other their fears, their hopes, their anger, and their enthusiasm. So that's S and P. O stands for others, the other people who matter to us, Zechariah and Joseph and John and Jesus. And G stands for gifts. What has God given you that God wants brought into action to change the world as it is into the world as it should be? I wonder if there's somebody you could call or Zoom or meet up with and have a one-to-one in which you both hear SPOG from the other person and disclose SPOG of your own. Sometimes one-to-ones become crisis conversations. That's what happened on that beach between Jesus and Peter. 3 times Peter had denied that he knew Jesus. Jesus who? Never effing heard of him. So Jesus asks Peter 3 times, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? Not have you done the right things, because they both know the answer would have been no. Not do you intend to do better, because that wasn't the point at that moment. The point is, do you love me? And having said that he does love Jesus, Peter finds himself commissioned with a new task to be a shepherd, taking care of God's people. It's mind-boggling. But conversations can be like that, can't they? They can transform your life. They can move you from shame to possibility. At least they can when they're as full of grace as Jesus's conversation was with Peter. Please don't ever put yourself in a situation where you don't feel safe, either physically or emotionally. But if there's someone with whom you could have a restorative conversation, like Peter and Jesus is, without making yourself unsafe, please be courageous enough to do it. Remember, none of us are Jesus. So a restorative conversation is likely to include us admitting where we've been wrong, as well as daring to confront where we've been hurt. And of course, Jesus is available. When we say prayer is a conversation with Jesus, we don't mean we hear his audible voice, but we mean it is possible to bring ourselves to him, us being fully ourselves in the presence of Jesus being fully Jesus. Thank you for listening. Just one last thing. When you're having a conversation, it's sometimes difficult to stay focused on the other person. We're always looking over somebody's shoulder at a party, seeing if there's someone more interesting in the room, or always thinking about how we're going to respond. I bet Jesus wasn't like that. I bet he, though he had a whole universe to run, was concentrating for that moment on no one but Peter. Peter, on the other hand, was looking at John and wanting to know his story. What about him, Jesus? No, says Jesus. What conversations I have with other people is none of your business. Your job is just to follow me.